What the hell is going on in the Smoky Mountains? On September 25th, 1981, 58-year-old Polly Melton went on a hike with a couple of friends in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Everything was going normal, but then Polly slipped out of sight, and her friends weren't worried right away. But they should have been. At first, they just figured that she'd be waiting around the next corner. But when they rounded that corner, Polly wasn't there. They called her name into the trees, they checked behind stumps and brush, they even retraced their steps, but they found nothing. In a matter of just seconds, a lighthearted afternoon hike had turned into one of the darkest days in National Park history. And if you think I'm being dramatic, make sure you keep watching because you're about to find out exactly what I mean. Even though Polly was 58 years old, she was super active and she definitely seemed younger than she really was. She and her husband Bob had been spending time trailer camping near Deep Creek, which is just outside of Bryson City, North Carolina. This was a place that they both loved. And a place that Polly knew very, very well. She knew the trails, the trees, and more importantly, she knew where not to go. Polly was out hiking with her two friends who were named Trula and Red on a trail called the Deep Creek Trail. Again, a place she had been before. The three of them set out around 3 p.m., just kind of hiking along and talking as they made their way down the popular, well-traveled trail, I might add. Again, this was the kind of hike that Polly was very, very comfortable with, a trail that she had done tons of times before. And at some point along the hike, Polly actually ended up kind of picking up her pace. She wasn't running by any means, but it was almost as if she got this sudden burst of energy, right? And if you're feeling tired and you feel like you could use a sudden burst of energy, well, scientists have proven that you can obtain one by smashing the subscribe button right now. You'll be helping us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers. We're getting pretty close, and so I would really appreciate it. So Polly gets this burst of energy, and she starts hiking faster, and she ends up hiking just out of view of her friends. Now, Trula and Red assumed that Polly would just wait for them ahead. Maybe she just needed a moment alone, or maybe she'd be tired after this burst of energy and eager to sit down and take a quick rest. But as her friends kept walking down the trail, they still hadn't found Polly. They walked from one switchback to the next, checked around tree after tree, but their friend was nowhere to be found. At first, they thought that Polly might have stepped off the path or wandered into the trees to relieve herself. When you gotta go, right? But after several minutes of calling out her name and looking up and down the trail, a quiet kind of panic set in for the two women. I mean, this couldn't be true. They were literally just hiking with Polly, and now she was gone. What the hell had happened? The sun wasn't going to be up forever, and they needed to act quickly if they wanted any hope of finding their friend. And so after searching all over, retracing their steps again and again, Trula and Red accepted the frightening truth, which was that Polly was missing. They rushed back to the trailhead, contacted park rangers, and the official search began before nightfall. At first, everyone assumed that Polly had just gotten lost, but that didn't really make much sense because, again, Polly knew the Deep Creek Trail like the back of her hand. And plus, it wasn't like this trail itself was super rugged or technical. And so if we don't think that she was simply lost, the next logical conclusion was that her fate involved something much more complicated and much, much darker. Bloodhounds were brought in, helicopters swept the area, and dozens of volunteers scoured the woods. And yet, not a single piece of evidence was found. No clothing, not so much as a broken branch. I mean, they couldn't even find any footprints, which was pretty unbelievable because at the time, Polly was wearing a super distinctive pair of shoes which had the sole cut in the left shoe. These shoes would have absolutely been easy to track compared to all of the other prints along the trail. But again, they found nothing. Maybe the popular trail had just been trampled on way too much, or maybe, if we're supposed to believe the impossible, Polly had just vanished into thin air. I mean, I don't know. Investigators looked into every single possibility. They interviewed her husband, Bob, who described Polly as somewhat down in the weeks leading up to the hike. You see, Polly had been caring for Bob through a series of health issues that he was having, and though she even had her own ailments like high blood pressure, nausea, general fatigue, nothing pointed to any major concern on her end. She was known to be a 2-pack-a-day cigarette smoker, but still, there wasn't anything so crazy that would explain her just disappearing suddenly like this. I mean, you'd think that if she was attacked by an animal or if she had some kind of health scare, the The search crews would have found some kind of evidence of that anywhere near the trail, but they didn't. Authorities were perplexed. Hell, I'm perplexed, honestly. And so naturally, it wasn't long before Polly's mystery morphed into larger speculation and larger suspicion from the outside public. Folks, a wild theory would emerge. And before I tell you about this insane theory, let me tell you about the reason I'm even able to make these videos in the first place. That would be because of Drink Element. Drink Element is the sponsor of this video, and they're by far the longest sponsor of this channel. And while I completely understand that ads can be tempting to skip, I want you to keep watching this one because genuinely I would not be making this video or any of my videos without Element. They've given this channel so much support, and they've given my body even more support, frankly, because I'm a sweater. And when, I'm sure as a lot of you know, when you sweat a lot and you don't replace your electrolytes, you get fatigued, you get muscle cramps, you just feel terrible. And what I used to do when this happened to me was I would just go to the grocery store and just buy whatever electrolytes they had on the shelf there, and they always sucked. They were always full of sugar and other crap. I never felt better after drinking them, but with Element, I do. Element doesn't have any sugar. It doesn't have any of the nonsense that all the other electrolytes have. Element is way different, and it also tastes way better too. So I want you to look at this right now. You probably can't see it. It's probably too blurry. Oh, there we go. This is lemonade salt. This is the best Element flavor. It's so refreshing. It just tastes so good. And I'm actually going to give you a really good way to try it while getting an amazing deal at the same time. Go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click that link right at the top of the description and go purchase some lemonade salt. And when you do that through my link, you're going to get a sample pack of 8 additional Element flavors thrown in with your order for no extra cost. So you can really determine whether or not I'm right in saying that lemonade salt is their best flavor. One more time, drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. Go get that lemonade salt and get your sample pack. Get some freebies thrown in there. All right, let's get back to the story. So some people began to wonder if Polly had disappeared on purpose. Trula and Red came forward to report that when they were hiking with Polly the day she disappeared, they'd been kind of lightly teasing her about a man at the Bryson City Presbyterian Church Nutrition Center where Polly volunteered. They were teasing her, saying that this man was clearly interested in Polly. And apparently Polly didn't deny this, but she clearly didn't want to talk about this mystery man. And on top of that interaction, a pastor at Polly's church had stated that she had apparently come to him one day and started talking generally about the idea of affairs. And this pastor wasn't exactly sure what to make of it at the time, but he thought it was notable that she was so concerned about the topic, even if she wasn't getting like specific. And to add even more intrigue into this affair theory, we'll call it, Polly reportedly used the phone at her church the day before she went missing, which was something that she had never done before. She didn't tell anyone who she called or what they talked about, and none of her friends or family reported talking to her on the phone that day. No long-distance charges appeared on the bill either, which led authorities to believe that the call was local. Now, if Polly did walk away from her life, she left behind no clear reason. Maybe she had just grown tired of being the primary caregiver for her sick husband, but that didn't explain why she hadn't, I don't know, emptied her bank account, or why she didn't bring any of her belongings with her as she disappeared. Nobody that knew her described her as wanting to take her own life either, and so she had simply just gone for a walk on a trail that she knew better than most, and then nothing. To this day, Polly Melton's case remains unsolved. They never found any remains, let alone, an entire body. There were no confirmed sightings, no phone calls, no arrests, just a woman who disappeared into the woods without a sound, leaving behind her friends, her sick husband, and so many unanswered questions. And the Great Smoky Mountains, as they so often do, continue to keep that secret. Polly's story is one of those that just breaks my heart. But there's also stories out there that make my blood boil, like the one I'm going to tell you now, the story of William Bradford Bishop. Now, this man, if you can call him that, simply went by the name Brad, and it's safe to say that Brad had everything in life. He had a prestigious job as a Foreign Service officer within the United States State Department. He was a veteran of the U.S. Army. He went to both Yale and UCLA. He was fluent in 5 languages, and he lived in a picture-perfect suburban home in Bethesda, Maryland, with his beautiful wife, Annette, and his 3 young sons, and his aging mother, who lived with the family. And I know that was a long sentence. I described a lot there, but I'm trying to illustrate that that's a good life. I mean, life doesn't really get much better than that, right? Well, unfortunately, everyone that I just told you about there, all of their lives were about to get much, much worse. Brad was very, very ambitious, and by the spring of 1976, he was reportedly frustrated by his career stalling out, or at least that's how he felt, right? He'd been desperately chasing after this big promotion at the State Department, and according to someone who knew him, he'd also been suffering from anxiety and maybe even possibly depression. And yet, despite those facts, absolutely no one would have guessed that Brad was going to do what he ended up doing next. On March 1st, 1976, Brad learned that he had actually been passed over for that big promotion, and it totally crushed him. He felt even more stuck in his current job now, and he felt like this promotion had been basically the only thing he could possibly do to get to that next level, and now it was gone. And so Brad decided to leave work early, and he told his secretary that he wasn't really feeling well. You know, little under the weather, no big deal. And in hindsight, I guess he wasn't wrong, because it turns out that Brad Bishop is indeed one very sick person. After leaving work, he drove to his bank. He went up to the teller and he casually pulled out several $100s from his account. Whatever he had planned next, he obviously needed a lot of money for it, and he also obviously needed it to be simple, untraceable cash. And so after this, Brad took his fat stack of cash over to the Montgomery Mall, where he bought a hammer and a gas can, which is a pretty strange combination of items. I mean, I wonder what the cashier thought when she saw that. And maybe I'm putting hindsight bias on this. I guess sometimes I'll go to the grocery store just because I needed like some butter or something, but then I remember that I also need some rubber dish gloves too, and that I'm also out of duct tape, and then I also want to get my girlfriend a bouquet of flowers. And now all of a sudden I'm buying 4 totally normal items, but from the person at the register's point of view, I can totally see how they might start to have some questions. But anyways, after Brad left the mall with his totally harmless combo of a hammer and a gas can, he went over to a gas station across the street to fill that gas can up and the tank of his 1974 Chevrolet station wagon. And then from there, he drove to a hardware store where he purchased a shovel and a pitchfork. Again, this guy was basically going all over town in the middle of a professional cash out and buying everything on the I'm up to no good checklist. Brad returned to his family home between 7:30 and 8 p.m. that night. His wife Annette and his 3 sons were home while his mother was out walking the family dog. The house was quiet for just a moment. His sons were all asleep, and so it was just him and his wife awake together. His day of disappointment, planning, and preparation had all led up to this, and all at once, Brad just lost it. I don't know how else to say it. Like, all that pent-up anger, all that evil, it boiled up to the surface. He attacked his wife first. He went after her with the hammer that he had just bought, and I'll spare you the details, but he killed her. And just as he was finishing doing that, his mother came home with the family dog. And Brad continued his rampage, and he killed his own mother too. But he certainly wasn't done there. I think you know where I'm going with this. He then walked down the hallway, and this is hard to say, dude. He walked down the hallway and slowly approached the door to his son's room. There's no doubt that pure evil was floating through that house on this particular night, because Brad was about to stack even more tragedy on top of what he had already done. He decided to finish the job by proceeding to kill all 3 of his sons, aged 5, 10, and 14, again, using that hammer while they slept. His violence was precise and contained entirely within the house. The next morning, on March 2nd, the neighbors noticed that, their home was oddly quiet. There were no lights, there was no movement, there was no sound of the boys playing outside. Days later, 275 miles, or around 443 kilometers south of the Bishop family home, a local park ranger saw a giant plume of smoke appearing in the woods. He decided to grab some other rangers and go investigate, and when they arrived, they found something absolutely chilling. The fire was coming from a shallow pit that looked like it was kind of dug in a hurry, right? The rangers slowly approached the pit, waving smoke out of their eyes, and smelling something much more than just a brush fire, right? They peered over the edge of the pit, and they were horrified to see all 5 bodies of the Bishop family inside of this pit, charred and brutalized, like something straight out of a horror film. Like, it's seriously hard to even describe this stuff. Authorities arrived at this awful crime scene and they were able to use dental records to identify Bishop's mother. The children had been burned beyond recognition, but they were later identified when connected to their grandmother and mother. As the police searched around this burn pit, they managed to find a bloodied hammer as well, but there was no sign of Brad Bishop himself. Or at least that was the case at first. As they searched up the nearby road, not far from this horrible burial site, authorities located Brad Bishop's abandoned station wagon. And inside of it were maps, camping gear, a blood-stained blanket, and a pair of boots. One thing was abundantly clear. Wherever Brad Bishop had gone next, he had gone on foot, and he was basically trying to disappear into the closest major wilderness, which of course was the Great Smoky Mountains. The FBI searched and searched for Brad Bishop. They used dogs, helicopters, all of the standard protocols. But just like the previous story, they came up with absolutely nothing. They believed that Brad fled into the mountains using trails to distance himself from the crime and perhaps to just disappear completely. He knew this terrain very well because he was an avid hiker and had camped in the Smokies tons of times before. He also had the skills to vanish if he wanted to after spending years in foreign countries and serving in the army. He knew how to blend in and even how to disappear in plain sight. For years, there were scattered reportings of sightings of Brad. A man matching his description was seen in Sweden, another one in Italy. One hiker in North Carolina claimed to have shared a trail with a quiet, well-spoken man who had maybe looked like Brad, but none of these leads stuck. There was never any arrest, no confirmed identity. Brad's trail grew cold, and the Smokies clearly helped cover up his tracks, which is just crazy because, I mean, this was a man who once sat across from world leaders. You know, he was well-read, well-dressed. By all accounts, he was super successful. And then after one bad day, he just snapped and unalived his entire family. And then he became a total ghost. The FBI even placed him on its 10 most wanted list nearly 40 years after the crime. They created a digital rendering of what his face might look like now, and they broadcast that all across the world. And yet, despite literally being on the top 10 most wanted list, nothing ever came from that. And until the Great Smoky Mountains tell us whatever it knows about Brad Bishop, we're all just forced to wonder if he died out in the wilderness or if he managed to escape and start a new life entirely. He completely escaped justice. The Smoky Mountains helped him do it. And if this next story tells us anything, it's that the Smokies don't really care either way. In October of 1976, 16-year-old Teresa, who went by Trenny, was on a high school field trip to Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was a crisp autumn day, and the group of over 40 students and teachers from a local Knoxville high school was hiking the Andrews Bald Trail near an area called Klingman's Dome, which I've been to. And I didn't know about this story at the time, and honestly, I'm glad that I didn't because I think it would have put a damper on things. Trenny was surrounded by classmates for most of the day, hiking with her friends, and everything just seemed fine, despite the cold and wet conditions along the trail. But, you know, it was good all the way up until the moment that it wasn't, I should say. As Trenny was hiking, she would sometimes drift either just ahead or just behind the main group of school kids. And this wasn't strange at the time. Trenny felt super safe with so many people around her, and even safer in the national park. I mean, it's literally called a park, right? Parks are fun, filled with jungle gyms and slides and kids playing Foursquare. Okay, maybe national parks don't have that stuff, but you know what I'm saying, right? The fact that this is a national park definitely gives it a added sense of security, but sometimes that can be pretty misleading. By the mid-afternoon, Trenny and her classmates were almost back to the parking lot where they'd get back on the bus and head back home for the day. They were all pretty tired from a long day of adventuring and hiking, and so a few of the kids decided to take a short rest while they were only about a half mile from the trailhead. But Trenny decided that she didn't want to wait. She wanted to keep going, and she seemed to be in a hurry to get back almost. And so as her friends took a breather, she continued forward on the trail and simply faded into the woods. Her friends soon got back on the trail. This was a short break after all, and they thought that they'd catch back up with her either along the trail or, you know, back at the parking lot. But that didn't happen. They hiked all the way back to the bus, and Trenny wasn't there waiting for them. They boarded the bus and they started checking each row of seats, but one after the other, Trenny was nowhere to be found. Maybe she was just in the nearby restroom, right? So they went and checked there, but they didn't have any luck. The teachers had no answers either. As much as the kids were freaking out, can you imagine how much the teachers and chaperones were probably freaking out? Everyone on this field trip soon felt a massive wave of dread wash over them when they realized that Trenny was missing. She was gone. And of course, the search efforts began very, very quickly. And I feel like I've said this a couple times in the video, but you know, rangers and dogs and helicopters and all the things combed the area. Her classmates were absolutely perplexed. They didn't have the first clue what could have happened to her. She'd seemed fine all day long. And so maybe she ran away. But then where would she have gone? She was just a 16-year-old girl surrounded by tons and tons of teachers and classmates. Maybe she had sped up on the trail and somehow fallen into a hole or a ditch or something. But then again, the dogs and the search teams would have found her if that was the case, right? I mean, they searched extensively. They even went outside of the park. They started checking local hospitals. More than a dozen of them, by the way. Authorities hoped that they would find Trenny there. One hospital in Haywood County, North Carolina, reported on October 13th, 1976, that they thought they might have treated Trenny on the previous Friday, which was October 8th. And so someone with the Haywood County Sheriff's Office took a picture of Trenny to the hospital, but it was later determined that the patient thought to have possibly been Trenny was actually some other local girl. Now, there's another theory about what might have happened to her, which is that maybe she was abducted. I mean, it's certainly plausible that a popular tourist destination like a national park could be a potentially dangerous place for human trafficking and child abduction. I mean, these places are so big and they're filled with so many people, so it could be real easy for someone evil to simply swipe up children and then, you know, cover it up or blend in with all the distractions. I don't know. Shortly after Trenny disappeared, one report came out that an underage girl in Bryson City, North Carolina, had tried to get married to an older man. And some folks wondered if this was Trenny, but unfortunately nothing was ever confirmed. Another report given to Knoxville police said that someone looking similar to Trenny got on a plane in Newark, New Jersey with a, quote, much older man, and the two of them got off the plane in Nassau. But again, nothing ever came out of that report either. Trenny had vanished, and the hope of finding her was rapidly vanishing too. To this day, no real trace of Trenny Gibson has ever been found. And the mystery of how a young girl can just straight up disappear in broad daylight surrounded by her friends and teachers remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in the Smoky Mountains and in all of national park history. And speaking of one of the most haunting cases in national park history, this next one is quite possibly the most famous in national park history. It's actually one that I've told on this channel before. This story is so significant that if I don't tell it, people are gonna rip me in the comments for it, so just bear with me. On Father's Day weekend in 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Lloyd Martin disappeared during a family camping trip in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis had traveled there with his father, his grandfather, and his older brother from Knoxville, Tennessee. While playing a game with some other kids at Spence Field, Dennis planned to hide out behind a bush and then jump out to like surprise the adults, which sounds fun, but this would not end up being fun at all. Dennis was last seen skipping towards the trail full of innocent energy. He was just a kid trying to play some harmless pranks. Minutes passed, and then hours, and then by nightfall, panic set in when his family had fully come to terms with the fact that Dennis was gone. He had never returned to camp. What followed was the largest search in national park history. I'm talking nearly 1,400 people, including rangers, a lot of volunteers, and even the National Guard combed over 56 square miles of rugged terrain. Heavy rain and dense fog made the search pretty much impossible, and lots of theories swirled, right? Some believe that Dennis had wandered off and then succumbed to the elements. Seems pretty likely. Others feared that he was snatched up by a wild animal. I mean, that's, I guess, likely as well, or possible, I should say. But the most chilling suggestion came from Dennis's father, who suspected that his young son had been abducted. Eyewitnesses even reported hearing a scream and seeing a shaggy-haired man running through the woods carrying something over his shoulder. Maybe it was a cloth or a large bag or something, because nothing ever came from that mysterious sighting, and that lead like all of the other leads, went cold. Despite massive efforts and over $400,000 in today's money spent on this search, no trace of Dennis was ever found. This search was pretty much cursed from the start, with a lot of disorganization, terrible weather, way too many people trying to get involved. More than 5 decades later, Dennis's disappearance remains one of the most haunting and heartbreaking unsolved cases in the history of the Smokies. A joyful weekend turned into a nightmare that no family should ever have to face. Oh, and speaking of nightmares, this next story follows a nightmare scenario and a beloved park volunteer named Ann Houghton. So every national park has a dedicated group of volunteers that make the place special. And for the Great Smoky Mountains, 73-year-old Ann was just that. On January 28th, 2025, Ann set off for a 2-day hike along some of her favorite trails in the park. She left her car at Smoky Campground. She checked her pack to make sure that she had everything she needed. She took in the cool mountain air, and then she set off for a peaceful adventure in a place that felt less like the wilderness and more just like her backyard. And I say that because Ann had logged over 4,000 hours of service over the course of the past 2 decades. And while she didn't volunteer for attention, obviously, she certainly earned it when she was nominated by the park for an Outstanding Volunteer Service Award. Ann loved these mountains. But the Smoky Mountains aren't really known for loving you back. They're known for being cold, ruthless, and, in this case, unforgiving. Ann started her hike with hopes of simply enjoying some time in a park that she worked so hard to keep running, and it definitely started out that way. But then, something really strange happened. After a couple of days had gone by, Ann failed to show up at a volunteer shift that she had committed to. And that wasn't like her at all. Her friends and fellow volunteers were immediately concerned when this happened, and on February 1st, after no word from her, she was officially reported missing. Which is obviously not a good situation, but I should say that park staff and everyone who knew Ann didn't immediately jump to the worst case scenario. They were sure that she had to be out there somewhere, safe and sound. I mean, this park was her playground after all, her safe space, you could say. Park staff visited the Smoky Campground, and when they pulled into the parking lot, they got a chill down their spines because Ann's car was still there. They all hopped out and walked around her car in circles, hoping to find some kind of clue that she'd been back there recently, or maybe that she'd gotten a flat tire and had to just leave the car behind. Something like that. Something more innocent. But they couldn't find anything like that. The car looked like it had just been left behind. Just a flat out spooky scene. The search for Ann grew very quickly from there. Rangers, volunteers, and multiple local rescue and fire departments all joined in. They all wanted to find their friend Ann. They searched all of Ann's favorite trails nearby. I mean, surely she was just adding a few extra days onto her adventure, right? She must have been just too dang busy enjoying her time in the place that she loved so much that she just forgot about her shift, right? On the afternoon of February 2nd, one local search crew was combing through a thick section of brush roughly a quarter-mile off trail near Enlow Creek. The rough terrain, the cold winter months, the isolation, all that stuff made this a pretty difficult place to reach, but they had a hunch that Ann could have easily ended up somewhere near there. You see, she wasn't the kind of hiker to chase after breathtaking views, popular spots like that. Ann preferred to find a unique and quiet spot and then kind of just go there to bask in the glory of nature. And just hearing that had a lot of people wondering what could have possibly happened to her, in this location specifically. Could she have slipped along the wintry trails? If she had fallen down, that fall would have been extra devastating if she was already off trail and away from anyone else who could have helped her. I also need to mention that Ann was 73 years old, and even though she was super active, it is totally possible that she could have suffered some kind of medical event that left her unable to cry for help, even if there were other people nearby. And I can't help but worry that some very evil person could have been lurking in those woods and could have been capable of hurting, abducting, or even doing much worse to sweet Ann. But I don't know. It's just a dark thought. As search crews pushed through the brush and the dense woods near Enlow Creek, they caught the familiar smell of the wet moss on the forest floor, but this time with a different smell mixed in. this smell wasn't as pleasant. It actually kind of stung. They covered their noses, but moved towards it at the same time. I mean, it was so distinct that it had to be some kind of lead to finding Anne, right? And as the smell intensified, they looked down and they saw something absolutely shocking. It was Anne, off trail, kind of out of view, and tragically dead. Now, despite my comment earlier, no foul play is suspected, and this actually happened, this year, 2025. And so the details of how Anne died haven't been made public yet, at least that I've been able to find. And I don't think this is like a cover up or anything nefarious, by the way, that they haven't released this stuff. It does make me wonder though. I mean, did she fall? Was it an animal? I don't know. And I wish that I did, and hopefully we'll know soon. The truth is that the Great Smoky Mountains would be a much worse place without people like Anne. I mean, you can't deny that. But like we keep saying, the park doesn't always love you back, and it doesn't always care about you. Anne is missed by park staff and strangers alike. May Anne rest in peace, as well as all the other victims I've talked about in this story. Guys, please be extra sensitive with this one just because it's so recent. Leave some love for all the victims I've talked about in the comments. I always appreciate it when you guys do that. And if you liked this video, YouTube thinks that you'll like this one as well. And so give it a click, and folks, I will see all of you in the next video.